The silence in the room was almost tangible, broken only by the sound of the lawyer's paper being turned. Sitting in the worn leather chair, I felt the weight of curious and judgmental eyes on me. This was the reading of my father's will, a ceremony I had hoped would be brief and painless. I had never coveted the family fortune, but the pain of such explicit disdain was a heavy burden to bear. Still, nothing could prepare me for what was to come. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and removed a yellowed envelope from his briefcase. "Before we continue with the reading of Mr. Rogerio's will, there's something I need to share," he said, his deep voice reverberating off the walls of the room. I looked up, puzzled by this unexpected interruption. This is out of the ordinary, I thought, watching the lawyer with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "this envelope contains a letter and a DNA test performed by Mr. Alvaro, the grandfather of the gentleman here present, shortly before his death." A murmur spread through the room. My mother, sitting a few seats away, put her hand to her mouth in surprise. My sister, her expression hardened, crossed her arms, staring at the lawyer. I, on the other hand, felt my heart race, pounding against my chest. The lawyer's words seemed like a riddle that needed to be deciphered. "This letter," he said, holding up the paper, "reveals that Mr. Alvaro, before he passed away, requested a DNA test. The result, gentlemen, confirms that you, young man, are indeed his legitimate grandson." The impact of his words hit me like a blow. My grandfather had always been a figure of respect and mystery to me, a man of few words and many secrets. Knowing that he had kept such a crucial revelation to the end of his life was both a relief and a new source of questions. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. I was there, at the center of it all, but also completely isolated in the whirlwind of emotions. That enveloped me. It was as if a new reality was unfolding before me, and I desperately needed to find my footing. But why? The voice that escaped my lips was more of a reflection than a question directed at anyone in particular. The lawyer looked me straight in the eye, his expression softened by unexpected empathy. "Your grandfather had his reasons. He left behind a series of notes and recordings that might help you understand." "Notes, recordings?" I repeated, absorbing each word with a growing sense of urgency and anticipation. Those words were not only a clarification of my origins, but also a promise of answers, of long-buried truths that were now beginning to emerge. Silence fell over the room again, but this time it was filled with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for my reaction, but I needed time. Time to process, time to understand what all of this meant for me, for my life. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my inner turmoil. "I think for you to understand how I got here, I need to go back in time and tell you how this all began," I declared, determination rising within me like a renewed flame. And so, as the lawyer turned his attention to the will, I prepared myself for an introspective journey to explore the past that, until that moment, had been partially hidden from me. I knew that by uncovering each layer of my story, I would find not only answers, but also the path to something greater. Something my grandfather, in his quiet wisdom, always knew I would need to discover for myself. The murmur in the room began to fade, giving way to an almost reverent silence, while the lawyer's words still reverberated in my mind. "You are indeed his legitimate grandson." The revelation, though expected given the serious tone of the meeting, had a visceral impact. I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief, as if a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying had suddenly been lifted. My grandfather, with his always enigmatic and reserved presence, had left behind a legacy of hidden truths, and now they were beginning to unfold before me. I glanced around the room, taking in the varied expressions of those present. My mother seemed to be struggling with her own emotions, while my sister, with a cold, calculating gaze, seemed more interested in how this might affect her part of the will. Her indifference stung, but it wasn't unexpected. We had grown apart. Over the years, each following our own path through a maze of family expectations, questions swirled in my mind. Why had my grandfather kept this secret? Why had he chosen to reveal it only after his death? Did he know the conflict it would cause? I wanted answers, but as the lawyer paused, allowing everyone to process the information, I realized those answers were now in my hands. "This is just the beginning," the lawyer continued, his voice firm but with a note of understanding. "Mr. Alvaro instructed me to give you these notes and recordings. They contain his reflections and guidance for you, young man. He believed that through them, you would find the path you need to follow." I nodded, still taking it all in. I knew these notes were more than just written words. They were a map to my grandfather's legacy, a path he had walked and now left for me. It was almost as if he were guiding me from beyond the grave, offering me not only the truth but also the wisdom I would need to face what lay ahead. "I'd like to see those notes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to understand what my grandfather wanted to tell me." The lawyer nodded, smiling slightly. "Of course, they're at your disposal. But remember, the journey to understanding, all this won't be easy." As he spoke, I felt a determination growing within me. I needed to know more, to unravel every layer of this story, which now seemed more complex than I could ever have imagined. However, before moving forward, I needed to revisit the past. I needed to understand how we got to this point. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the sunlight filter through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the floor. It was as if I were looking not only at the world outside, but also within myself, at the memories that had brought me here. I knew the truth was there, waiting to be unearthed. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, and prepared myself for the difficult task ahead. "To understand all of this, I need to go back in time," I declared, more to myself than to anyone else in the room. "There is so much I need to remember and understand. Only by revisiting the past can I move forward." With this determination pulsing in my chest, I prepared to embark on a journey that promised not only answers, but also a new beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, guided by my grandfather's words and memory. The memory of that day was still vivid, like a painting of intense colors I couldn't erase from my mind. It was a sunny afternoon, and the family's beach house was filled with laughter and lively conversation. The smell of barbecue mingled with the sea breeze, creating an atmosphere that at first glance seemed perfect. However, appearances can be deceiving, and that family gathering was about to turn into a scene I'd rather forget. I remember being anxious that morning. My father had mentioned wanting to have a serious talk with me. He'd always been a man of clear expectations and high demands, and I knew any slip-up could result in a long lecture about how I was wasting my potential. Even so, I still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he was finally willing to listen. The afternoon wore on, and back in the living room, conversation flowed naturally among the relatives. I felt somewhat out of place, as if I were watching everything from the outside without truly being a part of it. It was then that my father, with his authoritative tone, called me to the center of the room. The sound of his voice cut through the room like a knife, drawing everyone's attention. "We need to discuss your future, son," he began, adjusting his shirt collar as if preparing for battle. "You must understand that your responsibility is to carry on the family business. That's what's expected of you." I felt a lump forming in my throat. I'd tried to explain countless times that my passion lay elsewhere, that I wanted to follow my own dreams, but his ears were always deaf to it. "Dad, I truly believe I can find my own path, something that truly makes me happy," I replied, trying to remain calm. His expression hardened. "Happiness doesn't pay the bills, kid. You have to be practical. Everything I built was designed to prepare you to take on the family legacy. And you throw it all away on a whim?" Each word he said was like a blow. I looked around, searching for support in the faces of my family, but found only looks of pity and disapproval. My mother looked down, unable to intervene, while my sister watched everything with a neutral, almost indifferent gaze. "I'm not throwing anything away. I want to do something that truly completes me," I tried to argue, but my voice sounded fragile, lost in the buzz of conversations that were beginning to emerge around us. "Complete?" He almost laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "What completes me is seeing my family united and prosperous, and you're destroying that with your childish ideas." Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. I felt exposed, as if I were being judged by a ruthless jury. My heart was pounding, and a crushing sense of helplessness enveloped me. It was as if, by trying to fight for myself, I had broken some invisible rule that governed our family dynamic. That day marked a turning point. The public humiliation, the feeling of not belonging, all contributed to me drifting further and further away from what my family expected of me. As everyone dispersed, returning to their conversations, I retreated to the seashore, where the gentle waves brought a kind of silent solace. There, sitting on the cold sand, I promised myself that one day I would find a way to be true to my own desires, without feeling guilty for not living up to someone else's expectations. That promise, made amidst pain and frustration, would be the seed that would one day germinate on the path I was now beginning to walk. Even in the darkest days, this memory served as a constant reminder of who I truly was and what I was willing to do to achieve my freedom. It was only the beginning of a long journey, but I knew that somehow I would find my own light. The room was filled with an almost palpable tension, as if everyone present was holding their breath in anticipation of what was to come. After the lawyer's initial revelation, which had already thrown the meeting into chaos with murmurs and surprised looks, I struggled to maintain my composure. The air seemed thicker, and the glow of the light streaming through the window seemed to have lost some of its vibrancy, overshadowed by the gravity of the moment. The lawyer, a man with firm features and a face that betrayed no emotion, paused, deliberately before continuing. He scanned each of our faces, perhaps seeking some understanding or acceptance of the situation he had just explained. I, for my part, felt as if I were in limbo, my heart hammering against my chest and a chill running down my spine. As I mentioned earlier, he continued, his firm voice cutting through the murmur that lingered in the room, Mr. Alvaro insisted that this information be revealed at this time. He held up the yellowed envelope, which now seemed like a sacred artifact, a bearer of secrets that could rewrite the fate of us all. My mother beside me looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes were glassy, her mouth parted in a mute gesture of disbelief. I could sense her restless presence, as if she were about to dissolve into a mass of unspoken words and unshed tears. My sister, on the other hand, remained fixed on the lawyer, a mask of carefully maintained indifference. The lawyer opened the envelope with ritualistic precision, pulling out a carefully folded letter. The entire room leaned forward, as if listening had become a collective physical effort, each of us yearning for that fragment of truth he was about to deliver. "This letter," he began, with a tone that mixed both solemnity and urgency, "was written by Mr. Alvaro in his final days. He expresses his wish that you, his grandson, recognize your roots and the importance of knowing who you truly are." Those words resonated within me, triggering a whirlwind of emotions. I was desperate for answers, for something to explain my grandfather's decisions, and perhaps even my father's rejection. What could have driven my grandfather to act so secretively? And why now, after all that had already been said and done? The lawyer then set the letter aside and held up another, thicker, more substantial document. "This is the DNA test," he stated, his voice now slightly softer, "which confirms that you are in fact his biological grandson." The confirmation brought a mixture of relief and bewilderment. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, it left a void I didn't know how to fill. I was, after all, part of that family, the son of a man who had declared in his will that I was not his legitimate son. The irony was not lost on me. "He wanted you to know," the lawyer continued, "that you have always been important to him, and that, despite the circumstances, you have a rightful place in this family." The words seemed to float in the air, finding their way into my heart and mind, where they would settle like invisible tattoos. My grandfather, this enigma of wisdom and silence, had trusted me, left a legacy that now needed to be understood and honored. The room slowly returned to a murmur, as if a spell had been broken. The people around me began to whisper among themselves, treating this revelation as yet another chapter in a family drama that had long since gone beyond the ordinary. However, sank into an introspective silence, absorbing each fragment of that revelation as if it were a vital piece of a larger puzzle. I knew that my life had just changed irrevocably, and that the decisions I made from that moment on would be guided not simply by a desire for revenge or justice, but by a deep desire to understand and honor my grandfather's legacy. With a new determination growing within me, I understood that this was only the first stage of a journey I would need to face, armed with the truths that were beginning to emerge from the shadows of the past. The will, my grandfather's words, were now a beacon that would guide my steps, illuminating the path I should follow. The night seemed endless, the silence broken only by the gentle sound of waves crashing against the sand, as I sat in my small home office, surrounded by a stack of yellowed documents and cassette tapes. The soft light from the lamp cast a warm glow over the desk, creating dancing shadows on the walls, as if the room itself were conspiring to reveal long-hidden truths. I held my grandfather's notes carefully, as if they were sacred relics. His handwriting, firm and elegant, danced across the pages, carrying the weight of decades of wisdom and experience. Each word was a fragment of his life, a glimpse into who he was and the secrets he so carefully guarded. My dear grandson, the first entry began, its words seeming to echo in the small room. If you are reading this, it is because the time has come for you to know the truth. I always knew it would be you who would uncover what I left behind. I could almost feel his presence there, as if he were right beside me, whispering every word in my ear. He had always been an enigmatic figure, and now through his notes I began to understand the depth of his intentions. In the following pages, my grandfather spoke about his own journey, his silent struggles against the expectations his family placed on him, and how he found the strength to follow his own path. He described in detail the difficult decisions he had to make, the sacrifices he made to maintain his integrity. It was as if he were revealing to me a map, a moral compass to guide my own path. "Don't let the world define who you should be," he wrote. "Your choices are yours, and the true legacy you leave will not be measured in riches, but in values and actions." These words resonated deeply with me, offering a comfort I hadn't known I needed. I was beginning to see that my quest for approval and acceptance shouldn't be the driving force. True motivation should come from within, from what makes me feel whole and true to myself. In one of the envelopes, I found a cassette tape labeled simply, "To the Future." I found an old cassette player in the back of the closet and, with a hesitant click, started the recording. My grandfather's voice emerged, slightly distorted by time, but still firm and sure. "I hope you're listening to this in a quiet moment, where you can reflect on what truly matters," he said. "Throughout life, you will encounter challenges that test your character. These moments are opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Don't fear them, embrace them." His voice, so familiar yet so distant, enveloped me in a sense of nostalgia and determination. He spoke about the importance of resilience, of learning from failures, and of never compromising one's principles, regardless of external pressures. "You have the strength within you, the ability to create something that resonates with the truth of who you are," he continued. "Remember, the true measure of success is the positive impact you have on the lives of those around you." As the recording drew to a close, I sat there, absorbing every word as if it were a valuable lesson. I now understood that my grandfather not only wanted me to know my roots, but also wanted me to build a legacy of my own, based on honesty, empathy, and innovation. These revelations gave me a new perspective. I was no longer bound by the chains of the past, but free to chart a new path guided by my grandfather's words and wisdom. With his posthumous support, I felt I finally had the tools to rebuild my life and find my true path. I took a deep breath, feeling a refreshing calm wash over me. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it with courage and conviction, determined to honor the legacy my grandfather had carefully left me. Leaving my hometown behind was a decision that took shape slowly, like a sculpture being carefully carved from a rough block of marble. The small inheritance my grandfather had secretly left me, carefully stored in a bank account unknown to me until that moment, became my passport to a new life, far from the judgmental gazes and suffocating expectations that were piling up around. On the morning of my departure, the city seemed shrouded in nostalgia. I walked the familiar streets steeped in memories of simpler times when all I sought was acceptance and unconditional love. Now it was clear that the acceptance I craved would not come from those who had surrounded me for so long. I packed my few possessions into 2 battered suitcases, a reflection of the few material things I had clung to. My grandfather's notes and recordings were carefully stored, as if they were sacred relics, ready to guide me through this new stage. His every word, his every piece of advice, was a constant reminder that I had his blessing on my journey. Before leaving my old home, I paid one last visit to the family home. The room was silent, as if the walls, silent accomplices of so many conflicts, were anxiously awaiting my departure. My mother stood in the kitchen, her fragile figure still beautiful, but marked by time and the choices she had made. "Are you really determined to go?" His voice broke the silence, laden with a sadness that seemed to hang between us like a stubborn cloud. I looked at her, my heart heavy, but determined. "Yes, Mom, I have to do this. I have to find my own way." She nodded, slowly, her teary eyes reflecting the internal struggle between her desire to protect me and her reluctant acceptance of my decision. "I hope you find what you're looking for, son, and that you remember you'll always have a place here should you decide to return." "Thank you, Mom." I walked over to her, wrapping her in a tight hug, feeling the familiarity of her scent and the softness of her touch. "I hope I find what I'm looking for too." I left the house with a feeling of mixed relief and sadness, as if I were closing a painful but necessary chapter in my life. However, as I crossed the threshold, a new determination took hold of me. My grandfather believed in me, and now, more than ever, I needed to believe in myself too. Hours later, as the bus left the city, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation building within me. Familiar landscapes flashed past the window, replaced by unfamiliar horizons that promised new opportunities and challenges. I was about to start from scratch, in a city where no one knew my name or my story, where I could redefine who I was and what I wanted to be. In the silence of the journey, my grandfather's words echoed in my mind, soft as a comforting breeze. "You have the strength within you." It was a constant reminder that I carried his legacy with me, not just in blood, but in spirit and values. Upon arriving at my destination, I was greeted by a vibrant city, brimming with life and possibilities. The streets were filled with people following their own paths, each with a unique story to tell. I took a deep breath, absorbing the pulsating energy around me. There, in that new place, I committed to building something true and authentic, something that reflected the values my grandfather had so cherished. I knew I would face difficulties and uncertainty, but for the first time I felt ready to embrace the unknown, armed with the wisdom I had been bequeathed. The life that awaited me was not a simple new beginning, but a continuation, an expansion of everything I had learned so far. And as I took the first step on this new journey, I carried with me the certainty that I was on the right path, my own path. The new city was a mosaic of sounds and colors, a constantly moving symphony that inspired me with every step. Walking through the lively streets, I breathed in the fresh air and felt the vibrancy of a place pulsating with opportunity. It was there that I would begin to build something truly my own, something that honored the principles my grandfather so cherished. I settled into a small apartment in the heart of the city, whose walls still echoed with the stories of its former residents. There, on silent nights, I reflected on what I wanted to create. My notes and my grandfather's recorded words were constant companions, guiding me like a beacon through the darkness of uncertainty. I decided that my venture should be an extension of my convictions, a space where integrity and innovation could coexist harmoniously. Inspired by my grandfather's lessons, I envisioned a company that not only sought profit, but also aspired to positively impact the surrounding community. It was an ambitious idea, but the passion that grew within me was enough fuel to make it a reality. I began the project with tireless research, immersing myself in books and articles, seeking both inspiration and practical knowledge. I spent hours in cafes, absorbing the creative atmosphere around me, while jotting down concepts and drawing the first drafts of my business plan. The focus was to create a consulting firm that would help small businesses reinvent themselves, based on ethical and sustainable practices, something my grandfather would have deeply admired. One sunny afternoon, I sat down with Clara, a friend I'd made in the city who worked as a graphic designer. She was one of the few people who knew my story and shared my vision. "I want the name to reflect what we stand for," I explained, as she sketched logos on a piece of paper. "Something that communicates honesty and innovation at the same time." Clara looked at me, her eyes shining with excitement. "How about Renewed Roots? It's a tribute to your grandfather and what you're trying to do." I smiled, feeling a surge of emotion at those words. "It's perfect," I agreed. "That's exactly what I want to convey." With the name defined, I began building the foundation of my business. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity: meetings with potential investors, financial planning, and developing marketing strategies. Every small success, from landing a new client to receiving positive feedback, fueled my desire to continue. Days quickly turned into nights, and I often found myself working late, lulled by the silence of the sleeping city. My determination was unwavering, driven by the desire to honor my grandfather's legacy and build something that made a difference. One morning, as I reviewed my progress, I felt a wave of gratitude. My grandfather somehow was present in every decision I made. His voice, still vivid in the recordings, was a constant reminder that I was on the right path. The hardships I faced only strengthened my conviction that I was doing the right thing. As the months passed, Raíces Renovadas began to gain recognition for its unique and ethical approach to business. Clients and partners commented on the authenticity and passion my team and I brought to our work. This was more than I had dreamed of, and each new day brought me a renewed sense of purpose. Finally, looking back on the path I had taken, I realized my journey was just beginning. The success that was emerging was not just a personal achievement, but proof that the values my grandfather had taught me could transform the world around us. And in that moment, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be, living the life I had always dreamed of. Rumors began to reach me in subtle murmurs and worried looks during business meetings. Initially, I ignored them, thinking they were just baseless stories, gossip that arises in any corporate environment. But as the weeks passed, the growing buzz about my family's company became impossible to ignore. It was as if a silent storm were gathering on the horizon, ready to break. My relationship with the past was a tangle of complex memories and unresolved feelings. But even so, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness when I heard that the company, once a pillar of success, was faltering. There was something tragic about seeing a decades-old legacy tarnished by poor decisions and unbridled greed. I decided to meet Clara for coffee, looking for someone I could trust and confide in. Sitting in a downtown cafe with the aroma of roasted beans filling the air, I shared what I'd heard with her. "I hear things aren't going well for my father's company," I commented, absently stirring my coffee. "They say they're facing serious problems." Clara looked at me curiously, leaning forward slightly. "Do you think this has anything to do with the way he ran the business?" I nodded, sighing. "My father was always impulsive, often arrogant. He made decisions without considering the long-term consequences. I always thought that lack of transparency and ethics would eventually take its toll." As we spoke, a memory of a family dinner surfaced, where my father boasted about a contract secured through questionable means. At the time, I was too young to grasp the gravity of it, but now, from the perspective of someone who valued honesty above all else, the memory deeply disturbed me. "It's sad to see how things have changed," I continued, shaking my head. "The company was built on my grandfather's hard work, but seeing how it is now, it's as if all that integrity has been lost." Clara gently touched my hand. "You did an incredible job with Renewed Roots. You followed the right path, and that's a great achievement." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that was growing inside me. I knew I couldn't interfere in the running of the family business, but that didn't make the situation any less painful. In the following days, news began to spread more rapidly. Emails from former colleagues and acquaintances arrived in my inbox, reporting financial scandals and management failures. Local newspaper headlines were no longer discreet, and my family's company was being cast in a harsh and unforgiving light. One particularly difficult morning, as I read another article about the growing problems, I felt a mix of conflicting emotions. Part of me felt a pang of justice, as if the company was finally facing the consequences of its choices, but another part, a more compassionate part, was saddened to see my family's name associated with words like fraud and corruption. Reflecting on all this, I realized that the journey I had undertaken, in search of my own identity and success, was proving to be more than just an individual path. It was a conscious choice not to repeat the mistakes of the past, to build something that not only sustained my life, but also honored the values my grandfather so cherished. As I moved forward, with renewed roots growing and thriving, I remained steadfast in my commitment to not letting the past define my future. And although the family business was weathering its own storm, I knew my path was clear, guided by the lessons learned and the roots that would truly never cease to be a part of who I was. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the phone rang in my office, interrupting the constant hum of the air conditioning. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a chill run down my spine. My father's name flashed on the screen, an uncomfortable reminder of a past I'd left behind. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the answer button, my mind flooded with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I answered, knowing this conversation could change everything. "Hello?" My voice was firmer than I expected, a reflection of the confidence I'd gained since leaving that old life. "Son." My father's voice came on the other end, filled with an urgency I wasn't used to hearing from him. "We need to talk. It's about the company. It's in serious trouble." The silence stretched between us, heavy and tense like a rope about to snap. I could hear his breathing, ragged and hurried, as if each word were a challenge. My heart pounded, a jumble of conflicting emotions fighting for expression. Part of me wanted to shut down, to refuse any request he might make, but another part, perhaps influenced by the memory of my grandfather, felt compelled to listen. "What happened?" I finally asked, trying not to reveal the internal storm that was brewing inside me. "There have been complications," he admitted, the words coming out reluctantly. "Bad business dealings, rash decisions. We're on the brink of collapse and I need your help." That unexpected request took me by surprise. He, the same man who had declared in his will that I was not his legitimate son, was now asking me for, help? The irony of the situation was not lost on me, and I felt a wave of bitterness mix with the compassion that still resided somewhere in my heart. "Why me?" The question slipped out without me being able to contain it, filled with raw sincerity. "You always made it clear that I wasn't part of that world." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. "Because you're the only person I can trust right now," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong about you, about so many things. And I know you took a different path, but please." The plea in her voice struck me unexpectedly, bringing back memories of simpler times when there was still hope for reconciliation. I knew that whatever I decided, it would carry weight. It could offer a chance for redemption, or it could be reaffirmation that following my own path was the right decision. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the tumult of emotions that threatened to engulf me. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted honestly. "My life is here now with renewed roots." "I understand," he replied, defeat evident in his voice. "Just think about it. Maybe we can find a solution together." I hung up the phone, the conversation still reverberating in my mind. I sat there, staring at the stack of documents on my desk, each one representing a step in building my dream. My grandfather had always taught me to be true to myself, to create my own legacy. But now, faced with my father's desperate plea, needed to decide what kind of legacy I truly wanted to leave. The day continued like all the others, but I knew that at some point I would have to face this difficult decision. And as the sun set on the horizon, its last rays transforming the sky into a kaleidoscope of colors, I prepared to face what lay ahead, guided by the values that have always sustained me. The weight of the decision still hung over me, like a dark cloud threatening to lift at any moment. For days I mulled over my father's request, reliving the conversation that seemed to have opened old wounds, while struggling to maintain balance between past and present. There was an internal conflict that couldn't be ignored, a clash between family loyalty and the need to preserve the life I had built. On the morning of the annual Raíces Renovadas event, a mix of anxiety and anticipation hung in the air. The team was busy with the final preparations, and the event hall, decorated with understated elegance, was beginning to come alive with soft lights reflecting off the walls. It was a celebration of our progress, a testament to the positive impact we were making on the community, just as my grandfather and I had envisioned. For a moment, as I took in everything around me, I felt a rare peace, a certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, constant reminders that true success was measured by the lives we touched, not just by numbers in a bank account. As I prepared to take the stage and address our guests, I couldn't help but think of the irony of the situation. My father, who had once rejected me, now needed me. His plea still resonated in my memory, living proof that, try as we might, we could not escape the consequences of our actions. I took a deep breath, walking toward the microphone. The buzz in the room gradually subsided, and all eyes turned to me. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, feeling the heat of the lights on me and the anticipation in the air. Today, we celebrate not only the fruits of our labor, but also a commitment to the ethics and innovation that guide us. The words flowed naturally, as if each syllable was charged with a sincerity that transcended the speech. When I started Renewed Roots, I never imagined the impact we could have. It was a dream brought to life through each of you, who believed in our vision and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. I looked around, taking in the familiar faces that had long since become an extension of my family. We're more than a company. We're a community dedicated to creating real, lasting change. The applause that followed was like a wave of warmth that enveloped me completely, a tangible reminder that I had found my place in the world. As I stepped off the stage, feeling the vibrant energy around me, I knew I had made the right choice. Later during the event, while chatting with colleagues and friends, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was a message from my father, a simple "thanks for listening" that somehow seemed to carry immense emotional weight. I read those words over and over, feeling the gravity of what they implied. Yes, I had chosen not to help him directly, but that didn't mean our bond was completely broken. Perhaps one day there would be an opportunity to rebuild what had been broken, but for now I was at peace with my decision. The event continued, a testament to all I had achieved. As I watched people interact, laugh and connect, a sense of accomplishment filled me. I had found my path, and though the scars of the past remained, they were part of the story that had shaped me. That night, as I stepped out into the fresh, city air, I gazed up at the stars shining brightly in the sky. Each one seemed to tell a story, a reminder that no matter how complex our journeys, there was always hope for light and renewal. With a light heart and a clear mind, I smiled, knowing that the best was yet to come.